Howdy, folks. I hope you're doing good wherever you're at. David here with this week's Griscom stream. Sorry I missed last week. I was out of town. But stoked to be back. Happy to answer any and all of your questions as long as they're very, very normal. But yeah, no, I mean, I wasn't able to stream last week. I know lots been going on. We've been pretty booked up on Left Reckoning, so we're not able to do as many topical shows as much as we would like. So I'm feeling very happy to be chatting about whatever is on y'all's mind. Camden, I'm not going to put that up on the screen. Y'all getting an echo from me? Oh, there we go. You know why?
All right. Sorry about that. It was coming through my Bluetooth speaker. We're better now. I'm sorry. My bad. I was listening to I was like jamming out in here before we went live, and I guess my speaker was just recording me. So apologies, friends. Back now. That sort of threw me off of my rhythm. But again, folks, happy to be back and hanging out and getting some questions. So feel free to jump in with any questions from the chat. I got a couple stories and things I want to chat with y'all about. Also, we have Discord questions from this week's post game that we weren't able to get to. Again, sorry for the audio difficulties a second ago. I've seen that somebody had asked a question up top before we went live, so I will answer that maybe to get us started, and then y'all feel free to jump in the chat with anything else that's on your mind. I can't put it up on the screen because it was asked before we went live, but our friend Appalachian Revolutionary also followed up by saying all power to all people by any means necessary, and they asked beforehand, why does left media oppose militant organizing of working class people across the spectrum for a real workers' revolution, secession, and guerrilla warfare potentially? Well, I mean, feel free to jump in with any follow-ups you have, friend, because it's hard for me to answer a question, for example, of like why left media is doing that, because I'm not exactly sure who you're talking about. I'm not trying to create flame wars or anything like that, but it's like, left media is such like a amalgamation of different tendencies and different ways of thinking about the world. And in my opinion, most of it is just like liberal progressive stuff, which is great. I'm happy that we have more independent voices out there, but very different from like a socialist perspective. More broadly, I mean, to that question, is that afraid or opposing, I think would be incorrect if we're talking about people who are socialists. But I think the bigger question, and I think why a lot of people get sort of frustrated, is because like you and who, right? That's sort of the moment that we're at, of trying to think about how to build working class power in this country. Then maybe particular tactics of what to do when you get everyone together, but more so, how do we get everybody together, right? Like the fact is that we live in a very atomized society. There's not, it's great that we have some people on the left now who are able to communicate with each other online and also in different socialist groups across the country, some of them much more effective than others, right? Been a significant growth, and I'm not going to be one of those people who dismisses that, but that's also nowhere near the kind of like penetration and representation that you would need of like the general working class with people who think of themselves as socialists, right? So if you're talking about, why are we not doing this thing? Well, so you have to ask, do we have the people? Do we have the capacity? Are there groups? And you don't have to have 100% of everybody, but hell, we're not even at a point where, most workers in this country think of themselves as workers. This is the project of neoliberalism. And of capitalism, to sort of obscure those very, very clear class dynamics and realities from folks. So, I'm sorry, I know where you're coming from. For a long period of my life, I was sort of there too. I'm not old or anything like that. I'm 30. But when I was 20, it's like, all right, how are we going to get this thing rolling? And over time, I've realized that, one of the biggest tasks is probably one of the least like sexy and exciting things to building real working class power. It's actually building some form of a coherent working class movement, a working class understanding of itself as a class in and of itself for itself, right? A class that is in an antagonistic position to the ruling class in this country. And we're not there. And I totally agree with the frustration. It doesn't help that I think a lot of people call themselves socialists or anti-capitalist now, and they don't. Um, it's very fluid because for the most part, what it really is sort of tailing the progressive movement in this country and sort of hoping that they can have a little bit more backbone, right? Um, that's why, like, we cover stuff like, congressional politics on this program because it has effects for people, and I think it's also important for people to have like a clear-eyed view of who folks are, what they represent, and what their intentions and wants are for society. Um, but I think that you can be really limited when you're sort of thinking it's like, oh, we're in this crisis because the right people with enough heart and backbone aren't in the high enough positions. The problem is that the working class movement in this country is incredibly demobilized, right? You're looking at, for example, what's happening. What's been happening in France. That's a country that has a lower union density than America. But the difference is that they've been able to maintain stronger versions of working class institutions, and a sense of like identity that, like, when something like this happens, everybody or a significant part of the population comes together. Frankly, we don't have that in this country, and there's a project, and there's a reason why. And like the bigger question that we have in front of us is, how can we be building something that organizes, mobilizes, motivates people, and convinces them that engaging in politics and engaging in the socialist movement is something that is going to be in their benefit, in their community's benefit, in their family's benefit, in their neighbors' benefit, in their coworkers' benefit, for the long run. And like, there's a lot of different ways to do that, and I also think that sometimes, you can want to be in a certain moment, in history, to such an extent that you're sort of missing some of the lessons of history, right? Like, look at groups like that might be talking in the way that you might want to hear folks talking about. Like, look what happened in Chicago, with the Black Panthers and the Young Patriots, right? People from Appalachia who left, because of economic devastation in their area, moved in poor neighborhoods in Chicago, were being brutalized by the police, were being brutalized by their bosses, and organized themselves into groups that were fighting back against the police and were fighting back against bosses, and eventually, gained the trust and built and expanded, um, and built to like had a real potential when they were working with people like Fred Hampton in Chicago, to really do something different. But right, again, like, that wasn't that people were coming to people with like tactics first, right? They were coming to people, with very, very immediate pressing needs, and they had people and organizations and some sense that, like, okay, help out, jump into this movement, and we're going to be able to get things in the immediate near term. And like, if you're not thinking on that kind of, very immediate practical level, you won't be successful in the more maybe long term or more bigger lift kind of, strategies. So I don't know. That's not a defense of left media or its role. It's more about, I think, how to try to orient yourself, and think about the real tasks at hand, for building a successful and strong working class movement. Because there's no doubt about it that, like, there's been tremendous strides in recent years, but it's also been really muddied and unfocused, I think. The analysis is sort of, just stronger versions of like the liberal left, right? We support unions, we support workers' rights more than Nancy Pelosi. And it's like, totally, that's good. I would much rather live in a world where that was the case, but that's also very, very different, from somebody who might want to sort of abolish, um, wage slavery in this country, right? Who wants to take under public control the industries in the society to utilize those, for the benefit of working people, right? These are different things from like the liberal left project. And I think that there should definitely be a little bit more clarification of these things and honing of it, because it's a really, I think, confusing mosaic right now. And you're also seeing, a lot of the socialist left even has just inherited almost every tendency, of like the more lib left, political movement. and you're seeing that with like groups, regularly sort of lining up against organized labor. I mean, one of the most clear examples of this, and there's a great piece in Catalyst that y'all should read by Fred Stafford and Matt Huber on the electrical system and socialism in this country. I think it's a bad thing how frequently, quote unquote, like socialist movements and socialists are sort of lining up against electrical workers and energy workers in this country. That's not good, right? Um, and I think that comes from the fact that a lot of people were sort of swimming in the muck of American politics, maybe considering themselves conservative, maybe considering themselves liberal, and then they see this kind of lightning rod and Bernie Sanders started to rapidly change their worldview, but without any kind of clarification of what that project might mean, without any kind of clarification of like what being a socialist is. Like a lot of times people think Marx was just like the most Marx is like the most liberal, right? Which is just not true. And even in that case, I'm using liberal in the modern definition of how you would maybe identify somebody who holds like liberal politics. And that's not true. And like that political education work is really critical. And again, these aren't projects that are unique to like pointy headed individuals, right? I've talked about this all the time, like Fred Hampton, in this country, right? Some of that you could say many things about him. You could not call him a coward or a counter-revolutionary or anything like that, right? This is somebody who took political education of members of his own movement extremely seriously, right? That you needed to read and you needed to understand these things, not as a kind of like hurdle, but so that you could be a better member of the movement, so that you could understand what was being done and why. And more importantly, when victories are achieved, you don't undermine those later because you don't understand why those things were done in the first place, right? Um, you know. So, anyways, if you're still in the chat, I'm happy to clarify and engage. Folks, feel free to ask other questions. I know that was the first one, so let's see what else folks have in here. I did not watch Richard Wolff talking with Hassan. I don't know how it worked, how it went. Let us know. John Ross says, "What's my take on Howard Zinn?" I mean, I think Howard Zinn was great in a lot of ways. I also think that Howard Zinn's version of American history was not entirely accurate, and I think it's important. I think like if you speak with somebody like Harvey Kay, there's a lot of like very justified criticisms of the historical work of Howard Zinn, and I've come a long way on those questions as well. I think that it's important to recognize the history of this country, but also not to overdetermine the embeddedness of the more right wing terroristic aspects of American history as something that sort of is representative of like Americans as like a people as a whole, instead of like a reflection of ruling class intentions and desires in American history. But might be something that's more needed to be more of an in-depth take or look at that work than something I'm gonna be able to do this afternoon. Um, Mateus says, recently in Buenos Aires, the governor said they would drill for oil in the sea. I feel it's an ecological misstep, but I understand the need for foreign revenue. I'll tell you, until we get serious, I think on a global scale about building some kind of international, Green New Deal program where there are alternatives for states to be able to one, power themselves, and two, to be able to fund themselves. You're going to come up against this a lot, and right, and it's like I'm not particularly uh, aware of what's going on in Argentina, and in that case in particular. But I think that if we want to move toward a future that can decouple itself from fossil fuels, we're going to need a tremendous amount of state investment, something that the United States has a lot of potential to do. And a country like Argentina, which is being bled dry by international finance capital, right, and even centrist to center left politicians there are very, very constrained in the kind of activities that they can take. That, like, you got to get to this engine of the reason why we're still committed and attached to fossil fuels if you're serious about changing the system, right? I think that, like, getting much more serious about power production, in the systems of how of how we power our societies. You're going to have to run up against capital, and in the case of a state like Argentina, you're going to have to run up against international capital until we can build very viable alternatives for that. It's going to be something where you're going to see, I mean, this is like a classic debate in the environmental left, right? Is that certain countries are saying, well, the United States and Europe are able to decimate the planet in order to sort of fuel their industrial systems. Why are we now sort of having that opportunity foreclosed upon us? And you have to have an answer to that. Good question here from Ray Bader, right? Am I reading it right? Rebalder, excuse me. Says, do you know the Lost Dog Street Band? I do. I'm a big fan, actually. I was trying to see them when they were here in Austin recently, and sad to have missed it. John asked me what I think about cowpunk, country, and punk music mixed. I don't know it, so can't say much. Appalachian Revolutionary says most socialists don't know they are socialists. A lot of people in the South might support a secessionist party with socialist communist policies if it didn't call itself that. Armed labor isn't useless. I mean, look, I'm not a big fan of separatist movements in general, like not just in the context of the South or even in the US, but like as a socialist, I think that, rather than looking towards sort of regional or national differences, like one of the things that's really inspiring and hopeful about a socialist movement is that it's unifying, right? Globally, internationally, and historically. That, like, you're a worker, right? And that is something that's an experience. That's a social relation that is borderless. I want socialist politics to be something that's sort of, doing that work of actually building an international socialist movement, rather than sort of separating ourselves off into smaller and smaller states. So, that's not something that I've ever been particularly attracted to as a movement, right? You want these things, you want to be able to utilize, like in an American context, for example, like you'd want to be able to utilize the full extent of like the American industrial system to be able to do things like power homes, feed people, provide for our not just our basic needs, but expand upon those, right? You want to be able to do these at scale, right? This is a very classic American socialist question, right? I've talked about a lot with like Eugene Debs and the Socialist Party in this country. At the very beginning of that party, there were all these kind of calls that what we need to do is we need to go out to Colorado and we can create a socialist town and we can live our little socialist life there, separate from big industrial capital, separate from the final fight, the real confrontation with the capitalist class, and sort of build up an alternative, and then we'll compete with them. The problem is that you're always going to lose, right? Because if you're talking about being able to build something that's able to provide as much material security for people, like the socialist idea is this: we have the capability through technology, through labor organization, and through like the things that capitalism has done to advance, to advance work to the extent where um, it's more productive, right? Labor is more productive than it's ever been, right? This is like one of the fundamental, things that capitalism did that was revolutionary compared to like former systems of production. The crisis of capitalism is that it's a system that creates plenty, and also impoverishes at the same time, creates new levels of depravity, creates new levels of poverty that hadn't really existed to the same extent before the stripping of property, the privatization of the land, of public space, right? Like capitalism does one thing; it creates plenty in an extent, to an extent, and also strips that plenty away from the people who actually create it. And the socialist challenge has always been the socialist idea, going back to Marx, right? This is not like a new idea. This is like Marxism 101. The socialist challenge has been, we need to take control of this system and rid it of exploitation and utilize these engines of industry so that we can all live meaningful, fulfilled, and better lives than we're living right now. So like the idea of starting historically like new is wrong. It's also running away from a fight, right? Which is not something that we should be doing. We should say, we made this. This comes out of the labor of generations of human beings, and we're not going to leave it to the Bezoses. We're not going to leave it to the Bill Gates. We're not going to leave it to the Howard Schultz of the world, right? We're going to take this thing that we built and we're going to use it to better the lives of working people. So, I've never like been very attracted to, ideas of retreat from that fight personally. I do agree, though, totally that most, that people should be a bit more confident in their ideas of being a socialist when it comes to talking to working people than they are. I think that, beyond though just thinking that you might have arguments or an idea that's convincing for folks, though, the real challenge again comes down to this thing that I think the left has gotten really, really bad at, which is like they think that everything is like the engine of change, right? The activity that needs to be done first and foremost is just like these one-on-one conversations where like you with like I'm not speaking about you. I'm just saying like to the general, public. It's like you as the person with the knowledge imbues that knowledge upon the people, and then they sort of act in concert with you, right? Well, certainly political education is important. Absolutely, communication is something that's very much needed, doing the actual work of talking to people, convincing folks. But beyond that, and this is the real thing that I think people get really tripped up on, is that you can say all these things to people. When you talk to people, they want things like to get private interest out of our healthcare. They want things like higher wages for workers. They like things like workers' control, but they don't think that that's a real deal possibility for them. And that, more than anything, is the challenge that we have in front of us. How can we build a movement that both has like the rigor that can understand the forces of American society, the forces of American capital, the forces in American politics, right? So having that like, ideological, intellectual, whatever you want to call it, understanding of the world. And also at the same time, show that not only do we understand these things, not only do we have some good ideas, that we have the capability of acting and bringing those things into being. And that's the real challenge. That's the real thing that like you can have all the answers, all the ideas, all those things correct. That's the real thing. That's the real bridge that very, very rarely, particularly in the US case in 2023, is not being crossed right now. And for me, I don't have the direct answer as to how to do that, but this is like the challenge that I see in front of us is like the most daunting and the most critical. I still think it's very important to go out there and say like, here's a socialist idea on this. Here's why we don't like bosses. Here's why we like things like Medicare for all. Here's why we like things like a Green New Deal in the short term, right? I think that's really important. Fuck, I talk like this is what I do, right? But the bigger challenge is how do we convince people that not only we have ideas that they like, that we actually have the capability and the coherence and the movement that is gaining strength, that those things are on the table or at least are achievable, for them. And that's something that a lot of people don't do, because a lot of people, their view of American politics is this. I think it's a bad one. Their view is that Americans are walking around with their head in their hands, completely oblivious to all of these things going on around them, right? And what they just need is to be shook up, right? To be woken up. That's not true. Most people have looked at the way the world is and they understand that their boss is screwing them. They understand that the economic system is against them. They understand that the challenges that we have in front of us as like as a globe are not being met by the system that we have. They're fully aware of all these things. They make a calculation that that's just the way that things are, because any alternative that they've seen has either shown to be an incredible disappointment and feels like a waste of their time, right? Or has just been so brutally crushed down, then why get involved in something like this if it's very potentially going to take away from my ability to find some kind of joy in my personal life, in my family life, in my community, right? That's more often than not is like the general state of people. So like, there's always this idea that like one day everybody's just going to sort of wake up and we're all going to do something in concert together. And it's just like that's not how movements have been built successfully in the past, right? What they've been truly predicated on is by building up strong community and trust and operating inside of those movements, like building outside of like direct struggles in front of them, right? You look at the populist movement in this country, right? The real populist movement, not the weird rebranding, that is sort of used derisively now. These were farmers in the South and in the West who were being screwed over by finance capital, and by the shops that they were selling their produce to. And what they realized is like, okay, well, the monetary system in this country is hurting us, because when I take out a loan at the beginning of the season, the loan in real value is going up by the time that I deliver the crop to the buyer. So there was a demand that we need to change the monetary system in this country so it's not solely tied to gold, right? Which was harming working people, harming farmers, harming tenant farmers in this country. And what they did is they got together as a cohesive movement of farmers and farm laborers, and created these people's parties, right? Which really had tremendous effects on southern Western politics in the 1800s and in the late 1800s, right? Eventually, those movements become completely co-opted into the Democratic Party, right? This is what happens. And a lot of people who came out of that then end up joining up another radical formation called the Socialist Party, right? Which was the closest that there has ever been to like a real working class party in this country. As y'all know, Eugene Debs, ran for president from prison and was still able to get, sizable amounts of the vote, so much so that at least you can see him on Wikipedia when you look up those elections, right? But again, these were movements that came out of directly people in a community recognizing their needs, coming together, acting on those needs, with revolutionary, potential, with like a farther horizon for the world that they wanted to build. Right? It didn't come from some guy having the right argument. It came from actual general organic sense of people coming together, working together, speaking together, and recognizing and understanding the world around them. That's what's in front of us right now. And you can't skip those steps. You're not going to be able to get around those. And I know it sucks. So it's not saying it's not there. It's not saying there's nothing to do. It's actually saying that that challenge is much more involved and engaged than just sort of hoping that people are going to sort of coalesce around like a new flag that's created by folks. Okay, let's see. Um, Parker asked me a question. I mean, I wouldn't be hot on either of them particularly, but if I'd voted in the California 2024 Senate primary election, would you support Katie Porter or Barbara Lee? I mean, it would be Barbara Lee for sure. Um, Probably not very enthusiastically, if at all, but between those two, um, yeah. Okay. Um, all right. This might be. I mean, I'm happy to sort of jump around, but like we're going to the same things. I appreciate the questions and stuff. But our friends, Appalachian Revolutionary says, should left people organize militarily for secession? I don't see that being the task that's in front of people right now. I don't. Um, it's just the material's not there. The potential is of something coming out of that I find to be very, very low. I'm sorry to pour cold water on it, but that's how I think on that question. Joe has an invitation for conversation too. Joe Snuffy, our good friend, says armed revolutions don't exist in a vacuum. They require certain conditions to succeed, and the U.S. has none of those. I'm happy to explain in depth on the Discord, and Joe certainly will. So talk to Joe in the Left Reckoning Discord if you want. Um, what's up, friends from Iowa? Watch on Facebook too. Appreciate that. I need to get to Iowa. I have some roots there. A few generations back. I've never been. Zat attacks says, "Hey David, do you think that with Finland's acceptance into NATO, do you think that this means a furthering of military expansionism and further expansion of the military industrial complex is something we should be concerned about?" Well, certainly, I think I don't know if you caught our conversation with Gene Bajelon on the 20-year anniversary of the Iraq War, um, but I think that he makes a really strong point that beyond anything, whenever you see these conflicts arising, understanding that like there is like a very material basis for these things, which is the enrichment of particularly American, but not exclusively American, arms and weapons manufacturing contracts, right? Like that is like a way to sort of gum up buying, buyers for American manufactured weapons of destruction and devastation. So yeah, I mean, I think that the continuing militarization that we're seeing in Europe is something you should certainly be worried about beyond even the worry about a World War III or a nuclear contest, right? Which would just be unbelievably devastating. And sometimes it shocks me how blasé people are about that very real threat. But beyond that, yeah, I think that it's not a good thing when you start seeing people mobilizing. I'm going to say this one time, and I appreciate the comment here from Henry. No, this is not Tennessee. You notice how this is like a very strong orange, right? Not some kind of passive, you know, in between, can't really make up your mind orange. This is the University of Texas at Austin, not the University of Tennessee. Uh, uh, Evan has a great question here. Says the housing crisis is exposing the failures of liberalism domestically. What are your thoughts on tenant union organizing to force real representation versus landlords? I think that tenant organizing is like right up there at the top, particularly, which is the case in a lot of parts of America, especially in areas where people are sort of localized, like into like a large scale building, just because it's easier to communicate with your neighbors to build something up than if you're sort of spread out, right? If you live in a house or a single family home that's rented out to you, right? Like it's harder for you to organize with the other tenants because they might be spread, around a large area. Not saying you can't do that. I mean, that would prevent me, for example, from being able to do that here in Austin. I think tenant organizing has a lot of potential right now because that is a very clear condition of class difference in this country. It's a very two world track, right? If you're somebody who owns your home versus you're somebody who is renting your home, people are renting their homes overwhelmingly are working people, right? And they're people who are being crushed by a system that is set up to benefit homeowners, right? The increased costs of property values, right? Which is like one of the most fundamental goals of local governments in this country is like, how can we get property values high, right? Because those people vote for us, those people donate to us, right? Very clear distinction in how our system doesn't work for us as working people, but more importantly, doesn't work for the vast majority of Americans. Right? That's a real fundamental tension between like the use value and the exchange value of something, right? The use value being like you use a home to live in, the exchange value being how you can extract value from it so that you can sell it or you can take out loans against your home, you can refinance, right? Yeah, I think the tenant organizing is like, when we were talking in New York City for the Left Reckoning live show there, I was, talking about the movement, um, um, talking about the tenant or sorry the Farmers Alliance in the South and the West, right, and the kind of early structures of the American socialist movement, right, which comes out of this, right, which I think is something that's really important to recognize, at least in, my part of the world. What they did is they looked around them, they saw what was screwing them, they saw directly a particular aspect of financial capital that was harming everyday people, and they organized around that, and they were able to build up a very, very sizable movement that even if you can say, well, they never were able to win, control over the government. A lot of the demands that you see from particularly the early People's Party are put into place in some lesser extent and some real extent, during the FDR administration, right? And I'm not one of these people who overpraises FDR. It's more saying that, like, look, these were things that were fought for that then were able to come into being because of this very, very serious militant working class organizing that was happening in the 1800s, early 20th century, right? So tenant organizing, I think, is one thing that, like, can truly build, not only a movement that's able to, demand changes to our housing system, to maybe lower the cost of rent, to maybe build more public housing, doing all those things, but also unites people in a common struggle that then is very fertile ground. I think much more fertile ground than sort of debating things online, for actually building that kind of community power that we were talking about earlier, for building successful socialist movement. Oh, is Trumpy indicted? Damn, Matt Leck, who's been at jury duty, must have, I can't believe he did that to us. He's killing our content. Lord, would be very, someone give me an update. What does that mean? Henry says, what would tenant unions ask for? I mean, there's a lot of things you could ask for. You could fight for more public housing on the municipal and state level. You could fight for a rent freeze, right? Which is no more increases in the rent you pay. I mean, if you're not in a place like New York, right, which is a nightmare, and they find a lot of ways to get around this. If you ever rented a place in New York, you'll notice that they say, like, oh, actually, this property is $3,500 a month. But we're only going to rent it to you for 2,200, right? Because we're so nice. Well, the reason they're doing that is to avoid the regulations on their ability to raise rents on you. So they want to have, like, the official rent be really high so that they can always sort of have that in their back pocket as an option. A lot of people got really screwed over with that when rents went down during the pandemic. And then they were sort of asked, then people's rents were going up hundreds of dollars. If you're at a place that has no protections, then you can, your landlord can do whatever the fuck they want, right? Demanding those things in a city, that's something a tenant organization could do, a tenants union could do. In the more immediate sense, if you live in a building that's not getting repairs, you can do what's called a rent strike. There was a few of those in the past couple of years, actually, in major cities in this country, where, you had scumbag landlords who weren't fixing the heating, they weren't fixing the pipes, they weren't cleaning the common areas. People said, well, we're not going to pay you. And instead of it being one person who's sort of at the threat of eviction, it being a whole building, then you can force a landlord to come to the table much better than you can as an individual. Oh, man. I feel like I'm missing out on all this news. Some going on about Joe Rogan too. I know I'm a bit behind, John. About 15 minutes behind on the questions. So, but these are nice. I know sometimes it's nicer when they can be completely interactive, but it's nice to, to be able to chat with y'all. Well, Zatatak has a question here, and sorry, it's not 100% clear for me what you mean, but that won't stop me from telling you what I think. It says, David, do you think that the fear people have about talking as a socialist is due to the lack of capacity? Well, I mean, certainly, because it seems like an extreme or fantastical, like, political position, but I also think that people need to stop being so cowardly on that. I always hate secret socialists, right, where people are like, what we're going to do is we're going to call it by something new, and then we're basically going to trick people into believing in us. stand up on your own 2 feet, say, these are the things that we fight for. These are the things that I want. And like, yeah, if you have to overcome, years of kind of anti-socialist propaganda in this country in those individual conversations, I know it can be frustrating, but just stand on your own 2 feet, because the more that we hold on to that term and say, this is what we're fighting for, these are the people that we're coming from, these are the traditions that we're coming from, we're going to be in a lot better position to start knocking down that door, so that people are turn off. And I often think that the kind of fixation is like, well, we can't call ourselves socialists anymore because of this or that, hasn't really been borne out. I mean, Bernie Sanders was one of the most popular politicians in the country, and he identified as a socialist. You can argue about whether or not you thought, um, it was real socialism or not. But the point is that a lot of people are like, oh, socialism is like this guy who wants us to have higher wages and healthcare. That sounds good to me, right? And like, those are the kind of things that we all should be doing, I think. Mateus is talking about the Wolf interview. Says today, Professor Wolf was at the H3 podcast, a very normie, memey podcast, but with a big audience. I couldn't help to think that Michael would fucking kill in a show like that. I'm sure he would. He did. It's a shame Michael never went on Rogan, frankly. And this is this is another good thing too. Zatak 64 says, I've been running a socialist reading group for almost 3 years, and I've found that people have found more strength in their views over that time and do have a greater way uh, to understand the world. Yeah, I mean, like, look at early Lenin Trotsky stuff, right? Like before the revolution, like they were all just like fighting with each other in like lefty socialist magazines. And again, like, you could disagree with those folks in terms of their positions, disagree with the movements that they built. I'm not one of those people. I think that I'm Lenin continues to be a source of inspiration for me, but you can't say that those guys weren't the real deal, right? And I think that that's important. Um, I'm not exactly sure what you mean, Jay. So if you want to rephrase that, it says, would you say that hegemony makes you psychically weak? If so, why specifically? Well, hegemony is like a state, right? Something is hegemonic. So hegemony, is something that you want to achieve, for example, like a socialist hegemony, right? If you mean by that, like capitalist hegemony, I mean, these are, Gramsci and all these folks I find to be really interesting. I do think that the cultural turn that happened in the 60s and 70s, that was like heavily influenced by Gramsci, and maybe it's unfair to put that on him as a thinker. Actually, it is unfair to put it on him as a thinker. I think that, well, again, being like interesting, it turned everything. It's like, oh, we're just going to have like good pop culture analysis, and that's going to somehow get us towards a movement, right? You saw a retreat from class politics, to cultural criticism, right? You see like the vast majority of Marxist stuff that you're going to engage at a university campus right now is in like lit crit. Nothing against literary criticism. It was just like the evacuation of those movements from history, from political science, and from economics, I think was detrimental in the U.S. But more generally, does it make you psychically weak? I'm not exactly sure. Sorry. Thank you so much, comrade from Europe. Humpty DMT says, respect, David and Matt. Respect you too. Appreciate it. Abolition revolutionary. I appreciate the engagement, but I think I've like gotten into this enough that I can't just keep answering the same one. What hope is there for left politics in this country without a third party? Well, I think again, like, this is one of those things where I definitely think that we need a working class party, a working class organization. If nothing else, um, the a way to think about it that I've always really liked is that if you think about the union as the organized like organ, right, the organization of working people on the shop floor, the party is the organization of working people on the national scale, on the political scale, in society. I think we need that. I understand the tensions, for example, about winning, different elections, right? If you need to, like, I'm somebody, I've never understood like the spiritual way that people talk about, for example, like utilizing Democratic Party ballot line to run for office. Like, if that works and that gets social selected, I think that's great. I don't think that what you should be doing is being a full-fledged member of the Democratic Party, but the good thing is you don't have to, right? You sign up, you run for office, and you operate in your own way. I think it would be much better if we could run independently or as an individual party, but I think that is a kind of case by case basis. In some places, all right, for example, like in Seattle, where they had nonpartisan like elections when Shama Sawant was running, I think that's great. I don't think that showed, for example, that like you would be able to use that same strategy in other places, though, where there is partisan elections, right? I think it is a unique case. I think that it's worth, engaging with that. More theoretically and also practically in those cases, I think is helpful. But beyond anything, it's just like beyond even the question of like putting up candidates for certain office, I think that like you absolutely need a kind of organ of working class power and working class organization on a national level. Something like a working class party, right? Again, like certainly would want those to be attached to an electoral arm, but also I think that like if you're saying that that's foreclosed because of this or that reason, then you should be able to build it because the benefits of that on a national scale are immense and are certainly needed, right? They've been needed everywhere, and I think that continuing to run away from that is only going to be to our detriment. Okay. All right, I'm coming down again. I'm about 15 minutes behind y'all. So if I've missed your question, I'm probably getting to it. But if you think I have missed it completely, feel free to just ask it again. There's a lot in the chat. I'm not always able to see everything. Well, Zatak64 says, Dave, how's your time in Victoria 3? Have you started to learn the game or are you still sucking? Will you do a Victoria 3 stream? Maybe we will. Every time I play those kind of games, I'll play them for a couple days and then I just realize I just can't live my life that way because they suck up a lot of time. But maybe that's the way to make it more interesting. Is I'll do a stream on Twitch or something. I know we're talking about maybe doing a joint one in the future. I love this too. Adam says trailer park tenant unions would be awesome. I mean, what people living in trailer parks are going through in this country right now with, the rents that they're having to pay to the park, is absolutely brutal. And it's something that we've covered a little bit on the show, but should definitely cover more because, it affects a lot of people, and it's really damaging. And it's one of those things that you think that the people behind it think they can get away with it because the connection of most people in the media is very far away from people, who live in trailer parks. Serpent Time says, have you been to Joe Rogan's anti-woke comedy club in Austin? I haven't. I will say, unless I'm missing something, though, I think that moniker has been sort of given to it by the media more than how they're marketing it. But yeah, I don't know. I don't really see too much live comedy in general, I must admit. And it's really like a New York, Chicago, LA thing. And Baptists aren't very funny, sorry friends. At least in the stand-up comedy like um setting. It just is not a religion that creates very funny people. In the stand-up comedy setting, I think they interpersonally can be very funny, but if you've ever watched like real like Southern Baptist comedians, it's bad, man. Bad. Um, Appalachian Revolutionary says, is education historically a prerequisite for revolution? Yeah, I mean that's been one of the most important, tasks of the Cuban Revolution in China, in the Russian Revolution. Understand it like this is that like knowledge is something that is sort of kept out of the hands of working people, not just knowledge of like socialist thinkers in theory, but like basic science, right? Literature, all those things have been taken away from working people, have been sort of prevented from working people having access to them. It's a very recent phenomenon that you have access to a lot of stuff, and there's a way that you almost have access to it now where it's like debilitating, right? There's too much shit out there. No, I mean, look at all the history of the socialist movement has always had a strong component of political education and just education in general as a part of membership, as a part of their political project. This is not some new attachment. This is like as old school as it gets. It's the most famous Tennessean, David Crockett, once said, "You can all go to hell. I'm going to Texas." I think that's in reference to my Texas hat, which people are getting confused by. So, yeah, it looks like Trump's got indicted. Matt Leck did his job, folks. Matt's playing Resident Evil 4. I don't play as many games. I go through like spurts where I get really into it for like a week and then I don't touch it for a while. Thank you very much to our friend from Australia. Says, keeping it sexy, Alpha King. Don't let the losers or haters get to you. I appreciate it very much, friend. Zatag also says, would you and Matt ever do a live show in Canada like Toronto? I mean, I'd love to. I think that, we want to go to a lot of different places. I think that, sort of, we got to figure out how we can do it, how many people we can get into a room, how we can make it make sense so Matt and I aren't like dropping a lot of travel money. Cause I'm pretty broke. So I don't really have a lot of money to fly around the continent right now, but we can find a way to make sure that we can get up there. We would love to do it. All right. Yeah, I know Shama Swant's not running anymore. Yeah, she'll be doing socialist alternative stuff. And they have the new organization, right? Workers Strike Back. We'll see what happens there. Has anyone seen much? I mean, I know they had a couple rallies. I know some people have joined up and messaged us about it. I'm curious to see what the tactics and strategies are going to be there. Oh, no worries at all, Jay. I just want to make sure I get you right. Appalachian Revolutionary said, "I thought this was a cute." I've been answering the questions. I've been answering them as they've come up. All right. Let's see. There we go. Danarchist knows how to make me happy. Says, "David, love your Texas baseball hat." There we go. Nothing gets me madder. Actually, I think there's a rule. Someone could correct me if I'm wrong, if this is just legend, but I think there's a rule on the T that they have like a weird copyright infringement thing that like Texas gets the T west of the Mississippi and Tennessee gets it east of the Mississippi. But that could just be a bullshit legend that I heard from somebody one time and I just believed it. Evan says, we had a modular home park bought by a developer who evicted everyone and only gave them like $5,000. It costs about $60,000 to move a modular home. We got the city of Portland to step in and buy it. Was that sort of recent? I think I remember that. That's great because like one thing people don't realize too about, a trailer home is that, you might think that you can just sort of move those, but they set into the earth and they become really, especially if you're living somewhere for a long time, like as you were saying, like moving them out isn't as simple as just putting it on a hitch on a truck. they're set. So most of the time you just get into a situation where it's just not worth it to pay to move it. If your landlord raises your rent, and you actually literally have like a captive renter market in a lot of trailer parks in this country, which landlords take tremendous advantage of. So I think that's great that Portland bought it, and I would like to see that more often across the country. Particularly as we're trying to build, in the context of while we want to be building more homes, like that being slow moving. I mean, for people living in those situations, you don't want to fucking have a predatory landlord on top of that. Appalachian Revolutionary says, "What level of education are Southerners educated enough?" Um, I mean, I'm not talking about going to college. I'm talking about reading together in a collective, in a community. That's what socialists has been doing together, doing that kind of collective work of trying to understand the world. Are people educated enough? People are smart enough. Absolutely, they are. Yeah. But this is collective work. This is collective understanding, and not just in the sense of like, oh, can you get to this level or can you get to that level? When you're reading and engaging with the world and with history, with philosophy, with theory, and you're talking about it as a group, you're going to have a stronger understanding of it than if you just do this as an individual, right? This is like, again, like an actual practice, like in praxis example of like, of being in a collective, right? We're reading something together, we're talking about it, because we all have different understandings, different perspectives. Not even just like, oh, everyone comes with their own story. It's just like you're going to read something and you're going to take something away from it that might be a little bit different from mine. And being able to work together and synthesize those actually is going to give you a deeper understanding of a text or of a historical movement. Or theory or something like that, right? This is something that's incredibly beneficial to like a collective movement. It's critical work, and it's always been a part of socialist movements, again, from Cuba to China to the Russian Revolution to the Black Panther Party to the Young Patriots, the Appalachian Socialists who moved into Chicago, right? This is traditional, old school socialist organizing and practice. What's up, comrade Arm Brown? Good to see you in there. This is great stream. Where should I eat dinner? Man, you should get some. Go to Neeksta, bro. Oh, it's nasty out though, so I might stay in. Dude, I've been on a real. Oh, is that why I was been saying Matt Leck? Because I have Matt's name on the bottom. I didn't even realize that till just now. What's way worse is when like Matt and I will do streams and sometimes we won't notice and we'll both like it will say Dave Griscom for both of them or Matt Leck for both of us. Adam says grilled cheese is the king of all sandwiches, dude. I've been like going real back and have been getting into damn, I don't know how to get rid of the Matt Leck thing. I'm sorry. It's bothering me too. I've been getting really big into fried bologna sandwiches lately, which is like a funny thing to start just like really, really wanting, but I have been. Our good friend Tommy Debut. Do I say your last name right, Tommy? I'm sorry if I'm wrong. Tommy says, on housing market and rising rents, are you familiar with land value tax? It's an old political economy idea on the shelf, but no substitute for politics. You know what? I'm going to feel really stupid right now. I'm like, yes, I've heard about it. I think I've talked about it on an old TMBS. It's just not coming to the top of my head right now, Tommy. I'm sorry. I don't want to just, I need to be reminded. It's been a little bit. Did y'all see Jordan Peterson's trying to get Bernie Sanders on the show and complaining that lefties don't want to go on his podcast? It's pretty fucking goofy. The best thing about it is that, like in the email when he's like inviting Bernie on, that he's like now leaked to make it seem like Bernie's so scared. Yeah, I'm sorry, motherfucker. Like a sitting U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders like doesn't have time to go on your goddamn podcast, right? It's great when politicians do interviews or something like that, but like I don't know. just like the height of self-importance for Jordan Peterson to be like, Bernie Sanders needs to come on my show or he's a coward. Is so insane to me. Yeah, Washington Bullets by Vijay Prashad. We've interviewed him on TMBS. I've been thinking about trying to reach out and get Vijay Prashad on the program, actually. But are you reading Washington Bullets? Or are you reading something else? I will say there's like a little like whenever I hear the title of that book, I'm always like, um, um, what's it called? Um, I always think of the basketball team. Thanks, friend. Missed the beginning of the show, but in case you missed it, Dave sent you a gift. Should arrive on Saturday. Well, I'm looking forward to it. Appreciate it. Very kind of you. Okay, let's see. I didn't do one last week, so I'm happy to keep taking these for a minute or two. Yeah, Lenny from the block says Jordan Peterson hasn't responded to my email inviting him to recapital yet. Yeah. Well, I know what the Washington Wizards are, but they used to be the Washington Bullets, friend, because they used to be the Baltimore Bullets, and then they had a controversy, so they changed the name to the Wizards. I don't play PlayStation. I have a computer. That's it. All right, folks. I have just a couple quick ones. I said I'd read them because we didn't get to everything in the post game last week. And if you want to get access to those, patreon.com/left reckoning. Matt and I are going to be reading part 1 of the 18th Brumaire, one of my favorite Mark's texts this Sunday for the bonus episode. So definitely sign up if you want to get access to that. But I told people because we didn't get to all the discords because Matt had to wake up early to indict Trump in the morning. That I would read them here. So I'll read the ones that aren't addressed to Matt. Edwin says, it's been a while. Still listening to the show, just been very busy. Here's a tongue-in-cheek question I have for you guys. Does Keir Starmer's open purge of the UK left make you in any way relieved that we have Joe Biden in America? Feels like UK Labour is the best embarrassing domestic left party of any leading country in the world. That's a, the difference is that like in the UK, like they were almost in power in a way that is unique to like is very different from the US, right? Like Bernie Sanders had like successful presidential primary, but like Jeremy Corbyn ran the Labour Party. And I think that I was saying at the time, and I think it's true now, is that like need to be way more brutal. They should have called for mandatory or allowed for deselection of labor members to get all of the old guard of the Labor Party out of power, and they would have been attacked for it. It would have been really difficult. But seeing what happened now is that effectively that's happening to all of the more left-wing members of the Labor Party who've effectively been purged or completely bent over backwards to show that they're going to be friendly to Capitol and Keir Starmer. I don't know. I mean, I think like Joe Biden doesn't have to do what Keir Starmer does because he doesn't have any left threat in his party or in his movement. Seb Gorka's back pain, and again, this is from our post game, so y'all might not have all the context. Matt was talking about how he remembers when he was first getting into Chomsky when he was younger, being really turned off by Chomsky because Chomsky, of course, takes the position of like all these people watch too much sports and it's meant to confuse and cajole people. Matt and I both say like that sucks as a position to take. But Seb Gorka's back pain says the Chomsky sports discourse reminds me of one of my biggest problems with Adam McKay as a supposed leftist filmmaker. The idea that if only people stopped paying attention to celebrity gossip and started watching the news is very condescending and in my opinion does not help when having conversations with normal people about having leftist politics. I absolutely agree. I thought Don't Look Up was an awful movie. The politics of it I thought were awful. From that very condescending, like, oh yeah, Americans are so stupid. They're just eating Cheetos and watching television all the time. And like, that's why we're in the crisis. Like, no, most people recognize the crisis. And it's the people in power like Joe Biden who are allowing it to continue, right? We're just all Joe Biden opening up more lands up to pipelines in Alaska. I was talking about earlier this week about what he's done in the Permian Basin in Texas and New Mexico, trying to push and expand the oil industry, right? Again, like the planet's on fire. We have to support Joe Biden in 2020, right? This is what comes out of it, right? And like turning your attention on like people, everyday people, like, oh, they're so stupid and they just watch too much television and movies and care about celebrities. Yeah, I've always found to be a really disgusting position to take. And also like the idea, like sort of like lambasting people who are worried about like jobs for coal miners and people who work in the oil and gas industry by making fun of like the parents saying that they were excited about the jobs that the asteroid was going to take. Right. Again, it's just like a really condescending and nasty way to sort of dismiss very valid questions that people have about what would a green transition look like in this country. And from everything we've seen, it would be one that would be on the backs of working people unless we can build it like a viable Green New Deal movement in this country. Sub Gorka's Back Pain also asks if we've seen Kevin Kennedy, the Southern TikTok lawyer who is incredibly entertaining, hates cops, has great legal advice, and gives off a very shady Saul Goodman vibe. I think he is great. Those videos are awesome. Him talking about don't talk to cops, how to, avoid getting in trouble with the law. I do enjoy it. Somebody made a tweet about it saying that like back in the day, the Communist Party had like 10 of these guys on retainer. We need to go back to that. Last one that's not too specific to last week's stuff. Dave from Jamaica said he's just wondering when the next Left Reckoning virtual meetup will be. You know what? Shit. I had meant to do one in the winter and we completely forgot. So yeah, I'll talk to Matt. Let's see when we can. I like to give everyone enough time to prep prayer. Maybe we can see if some like in the next month or so. I'd love to do. I really enjoy this. All right, I'm gonna do a quick run through, make sure I didn't miss anything big, and then I'm gonna run, folks. The Discord, you get Discord through patreon.com/left reckoning. Appalachian Revolutionary says working people ask, how do we replace corrupt corporate government? Well, the only way you're going to be able to replace corrupt corporate government is by building a movement that has the capacity and the strength to overcome it. You're not going to get that through some nice politician. And, you're also not going to get it by, fantasizing about a moment. You have to build the conditions for that moment. This is like one of the key lessons from any revolutionary movement ever is that you have to make those conditions. And you can't just it's not a question of like spirit or heart. It's a very material question of how can you build a movement that has the capacity to act in unison, to be able to utilize the full strength of working people and to sustain them in the course of that struggle, right? Because, while we talk about successful movements, there's been plenty that have not only failed, but, failed in the way that they were even interacting with working people, right? You look at like some of the weird lefty cults that have popped up throughout history that were very damaging to to working people, right? You don't want to replicate that, and the only way to change that is to have a very, very democratic structure. Thinking about like the Maoist movements in Peru, which we're doing horrific things to working people, right? You don't want to do that again. Yeah, so like, it's tough, man. That sucks. It's like it's no one weird trick to socialism, unfortunately. It's a process. Doesn't have to mean it's like generations long, but it's something that you have to really start thinking more materially about how to build that up. All right. Love this too. Seth says Americans aren't stupid; they have a boot on their neck. I 100% agree with that. Nothing like look if you hate working American people, right? Then like you're not a socialist, right? You're I don't know a misanthrope, right? There's a lot of that shit going on now. A lot of weird kind of like pseudo left shit that just seems to really hate everyday working people in this country. I think it's bad. It shows actually, the fact that a lot of those people don't come from working class. Jay says, yeah, I was confused by the politics of that movie. Yeah, Dave Sirota was one of the writers on it. Yeah, I don't know. I thought it was bad. Okay. All right, folks. I think unless I'm missing something big, I appreciate everyone so much. Thanks for hanging out. I always love chatting with y'all. Again, this Sunday, 18th Brumaire, Mark's reading series will be up for patrons Sunday afternoon. You can access that patreon.com/leftreckoning. We're going to be doing an in-depth episode on Reconstruction, I think, for next week's episode. Really looking forward to that. We're going to have our friend Paul Prescott on to talk about one of the great lefty militant working class labor leaders, Zaki. We got a lot of things coming up in this next month. So keep your eye, keep tuned in. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. That really helps us out a lot. And yeah, folks, be back this Sunday and see the rest of y'all on Tuesday. Take care.